Here in Massachusetts, you can easily say there's more inclusiveness for people of different sexual orientations, and it's almost a quarter of a century since a Republican governor named a commission on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth. Despite the progress since the early 90s, many challenges remain. To tell us about the commission's new set of recommendations for action are two of the current members, Erika, Rickard, and Vilma, Uribe. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to start with Erika. One of the main things that shows how much of a problem you've got to deal with for young people is health disparities. So what are we talking about here?
So we have a lot of data from several years now from the CDC here in Massachusetts that shows that youth that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning really face remarkable disparities in terms of everything from the risks of being kicked out of their own homes, of being bullied and harassed in schools, of facing violence, including intimate partner violence, violence against someone that they've been dating. They're more likely to carry a gun to school or some other weapon to school because they feel threatened. They're also more likely to skip school because they feel threatened. One of the more striking statistics is that gay and lesbian youth are actually more likely to either get pregnant or to get someone else pregnant than their heterosexual peers. And I think the more that we look at this data, the more that we see the same trends taking place year after year after year that ultimately affects young people's lives and also affects costs to the Commonwealth over decades as young people age out of high school and continue on in terms of having health issues, mental health issues, and requiring government services.
Well, before you got involved in the commission, you were doing work with people affected by domestic violence. So what's the overlap between that and the LGBTQ population?
Actually, as I was sharing before, is like one of the reasons why I was kind of pushed to join the commission is that I was doing healthy relationships workshops and after school programs, and I think issues of kind of in particular, I was working with a youth that identifies as LGBTQ, and they were facing issues of kind of, homelessness and kind of because of their identity, but also a number of factors. And I think that's kind of what led me to kind of be present on the commission. And I think with support, I've stayed on the commission and continue to kind of advocate for like youth that are facing either homelessness or teen dating violence. And I think as an organizer, I continue to do this work.
Almost any relationship could be abusive, regardless sexual orientation. But for LGBTQ youth, how are things worse for them if they're in a situation like that?
I think for the most part, youth relationships aren't taken as seriously. And I think if the parent, oftentimes I've heard many stories where the parent, because of their either gender identity or sexual orientation, I think there's further stigma about their relationships, and oftentimes there isn't places to reach out for support. And I think in particular, the domestic violence movement has focused a lot on heterosexual relationships. And I think one of the things that in my work in trying to address is kind of not only like the need to advocate for people within the LGBTQ community, but also for youth as well, which there doesn't tend to be like enough services for them in general.
Well, I imagine it's less likely you can go to your parents or even feel comfortable walking into an agency, because it's one thing to be abused, but to have to tell somebody who might not know it yet that you have this orientation, I guess that's not easy.
Yeah.
Right. Erika, what about just being able to get a handle on what's going on out there? Because one of the recommendations is about gathering data. Take me into that. Why is that so much important?
Sure. So exactly the conversation that you're having right now really is important for us to understand what these disparities are and what the numbers are in terms of the numbers of young people who are LGBT and queer and questioning, so that we can see what the disparities are and see where we need to target resources. So one of the common themes in our recommendations is improving our data collection measures. And one of the agencies that's doing that right now is the Department of Youth Services, is beginning to ask young people at intake how they identify in terms of their sexual orientation and their gender identity, for both in order to be able to provide adequate services for those young people, and also to be able to report back on the numbers of young people that they're serving that identify within those categories.
Vilma, another recommendation is about the way we talk about the LGBTQ population in schools and how the rest of us are supposed to get along. What should be done differently?
I think you can also follow up on this, Erika. I think with youth in schools, I think one of the big issues is kind of acceptance for transgender youth in particular. And I think that is kind of one of the most prevalent issues that we've worked with heavily here in Massachusetts and have had a lot of support from kind of leaders within kind of either locally, we have superintendents kind of on the commission that have or are currently on the commission as well. And teachers and social workers that kind of work with us to, in particular, advocate for transgender youth across the Commonwealth. And I think that is kind of one of the main issues that kind of comes to mind right now. What would you say?
Yeah, I agree. I think we've had an act relative to gender identity passed in 2012, which added gender identity as a protected category in schools as well as employment and housing. And what the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education did that I think is really remarkable is they took that law and transformed that into some really concrete guidance for schools about how do you abide by this law? How do you ensure that young people are not being discriminated against based on gender identity in schools? And it's extended throughout the Commonwealth.
Erika, finally, if people want to get in touch with the Commission, find out more, is there a way they can do that online?
Yes, so if they go to mass.gov/CGLY, which is Commission on Gay and Lesbian Youth, there's all sorts of information there. And it has this year's recommendations and previous years and some more contact information as well.